My name is Vana Thornell. I'm a 70-year-old retired art history professor, content with my small world in Beacon Hill, Boston. That life shattered when Amelia, my only daughter, brought me a get-rich-quick scheme called Biovantes and asked me to bet everything, the entire legacy my late husband spent his whole life building. Its glossy veneer couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes. I turned to Leo Martinez, a former student who's now a cybersecurity expert, to find the truth. And the truth was more brutal than any drama. Biovantes was a Ponzi scheme, and Amelia, the child I adored, was drowning in millions of dollars of debt, ready to throw her own mother to the wolves to save herself. To her, I was just an old, easy mark. But she forgot one thing: a historian spends her life learning to tell a masterpiece from a forgery. In this game, I'm playing by my own rules, and I'm about to flip the whole board. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The afternoon light, the color of old honey, filtered through the bay window of my Beacon Hill brownstone, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, forgotten stars. Each particle I imagined carried a story, a whisper from a turned page, a fleck of dried pigment from my late husband Arthur's last canvas, a memory of laughter that had long since settled into the floorboards. At 70, my life had become a quiet curation of such memories. I was Vana Thornell, once a professor of art history at the university just across the Charles River, now a widow whose most pressing daily task was deciding which tea to brew. The world of acquisitions and mergers, of alpha returns and blockchain, was as foreign to me as a forgotten dialect. That is, until my daughter Amelia brought it crashing through my front door. She didn't knock so much as announce her presence with a gust of cold October air and the scent of expensive perfume. Amelia was a whirlwind of Chanel and ambition, a 34-year-old supernova in the Boston financial world. Her dark hair was cut into a severe, elegant bob that framed a face that was a sharper, more restless version of my own. "Mom, you're here. Good." She kissed the air beside my cheek, her eyes already scanning the room, cataloging its contents not as art, but as assets. "I don't have much time. Big meeting with the partners at 4. "Hello to you too, darling," I said, setting down my book on the Italian Renaissance. "Would you like some tea? I have a lovely Earl Grey creme." She waved a dismissive hand, her fingers adorned with rings that cost more than my first car. "No time, Mom. Listen, I have something incredible for you, an opportunity, the kind of thing that sets you up for life." I raised an eyebrow. "Amelia, I am set up for life." A very quiet, contented life. My gaze drifted to the portrait of Arthur above the fireplace, his kind eyes seeming to watch over me. He had been a man who found his wealth in color, light, and the love we shared for 45 years. The nest egg he left me was not a dragon's hoard to be gambled with, it was the final brushstroke of his care for me, a testament to a life of prudent, steady work. It was everything. Exactly. Quiet. Contented. "Safe," she said, the words sounding like accusations. "But what if it could be more? What if you could triple it? What if you could finally stop worrying about every little thing?" "I don't worry about every little thing," I countered gently. "I worry when the hydrangeas get too much sun. That's about the extent of it." She sighed, a sound of profound impatience, as if my tranquility were a personal failing she was duty-bound to correct. From her sleek leather briefcase, she produced a glossy brochure, the paper so thick it felt like a proclamation. The cover was a swirl of blues and greens, an abstract design that looked vaguely cellular. The name was emblazoned in silver letters, Biovantes Innovations. "This is it," she announced, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're on the verge of a breakthrough in cellular regeneration. Think about it, Mom. Curing age-related decay. It's not just the next big thing, it's the only thing. We're getting in on the ground floor. A private offering just for premier clients. I had to pull every string I have to get you a spot." I took the brochure. The language inside was a dense thicket of scientific jargon and financial promises. Proprietary stem cell activation. Phase II FDA trials exceeding all projections. Projected 300% growth in 24 months. It felt less like an investment prospectus and more like a science fiction novel. "Amelia, this is aggressive," I said, choosing my word carefully. "Arthur and I, we always invested in municipal bonds, blue-chip stocks, things you can set your watch to." "Mom, that's why Dad worked until he was 68, she said, her tone softening but with a sharp, calculated edge. "He deserved a long, luxurious retirement. You deserve it now. This is how you get it. This is how you stop living like a retired professor." She gestured around the room at the worn oriental rugs, the towering shelves of books, the comfortable but far from trendy furniture. This is legacy money, our legacy, our legacy. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. She wanted to secure her future, I understood that. But this felt different. It felt desperate. There was a feverish light in her eyes I hadn't seen before. How much would this investment be? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Everything. We liquidate the portfolio, all of it, go all in. The buy-in is significant, but the returns, Mom, the returns will be generational. Everything. The word echoed in the quiet room. The money from the sale of Arthur's studio. The insurance policy he'd meticulously paid into for decades. The retirement fund we'd built, dollar by painstaking dollar. All of it gambled on a promise printed on glossy paper. I need to think about it, I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. There's no time to think, she insisted, a crack in her composure. The offering closes Friday. This is it. Do you trust me? I'm your daughter. I'm a professional. This is what I do. I looked at this brilliant, beautiful, terrifying stranger who was my child. I wanted to trust her. Lord, how I wanted to. But Arthur's voice echoed in my mind, a favorite phrase he'd use whenever a deal seemed too good to be true. Vana, my love, the only free cheese is in a mousetrap. I'll look it over, I promised, my voice noncommittal. Her face fell, a flicker of raw frustration crossing her features before being replaced by a practiced, winning smile. Okay, Mom, okay, look it over. But don't look too long. Opportunity doesn't wait. She kissed my cheek again, a swift, dry peck, and was gone as quickly as she had arrived, leaving the brochure on the coffee table like a ticking bomb. For a long time, I just sat there, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I picked up the brochure again, running my fingers over the slick surface. It felt cold, impersonal, unreal. The historian in me, the part trained to demand primary sources, to question every narrative, was screaming. Where were the peer-reviewed studies? The independent financial audits? The full SEC filings? All Amelia had offered was a shiny pamphlet and a desperate plea to trust her. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the phone. I didn't call my financial advisor. He was the one who had recommended Amelia take over my portfolio years ago. I scrolled through my contacts, past florists and fellow museum board members, until I found a name from a different lifetime. A name that represented a different kind of expertise. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Hello, Leo Martinez, it's Vana Thornell, your old professor. There was a pause, then a warm, genuine laugh. Professor Thornell, my God, it's been years. To what do I owe the honor? Are you finally ready to let me digitize your entire library? Leo had been the brightest student in my art as historical evidence seminar a decade ago. A brilliant, restless mind that saw patterns and codes in everything from Renaissance tapestries to lines of computer script. He'd gone on to found one of Boston's most respected cybersecurity firms. He was a digital ghost, a man who could walk through firewalls and pluck secrets from the ether. Something like that, Leo, I said, my voice steadier now, a sense of purpose solidifying within me. I have a piece of modern art I'd like you to analyze. It's a prospectus. And I need to know if it's a masterpiece or a forgery. That evening, I met my dearest friend, Margaret Chen, for our weekly dinner. Margaret had been the head of the comparative literature department before she retired, and her mind was as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. We seen each other through widowhood, academic squabbles, and the bewildering process of becoming elderly in a world obsessed with youth. She wants you to invest everything. Margaret asked, setting down her wine glass with a thud. We were at our favorite little Italian place in the North End, a spot so old-fashioned it still had checkered tablecloths. The whole kit and caboodle, on a biotech startup nobody ever heard of? I nodded, pushing a piece of calamari around my plate. She called it generational wealth. I call it generational theft, Margaret snorted. Vana, you didn't say yes, did you? I told her I'd think about it. Margaret, you should have seen her. It was manic. There was this desperation in her eyes. It wasn't just about making me money. It felt like she needed this. Urgently. Margaret leaned forward, her expression serious. And that's what scares me. Need is a terrible investment advisor. Your Arthur, bless his soul, built that nest egg with patience and wisdom. You don't throw wisdom away for a gamble, not even for your own child. She reached across the table and patted my hand. So, what are you going to do? I called someone, I admitted. A former student, Leo Martinez, he's in cybersecurity. He's going to look into it, discreetly. Margaret's eyes lit up with a familiar, fierce loyalty. Good, you fight fire with fire, or in this case, you fight glossy, jargon-filled nonsense with a tech genius who can see through the matrix. She took a sip of her wine. This isn't just about money, Vana, it's about respect. She's treating you like an ATM, not a mother. Her words struck a chord. It wasn't the potential loss of the money that hurt the most. It was the sickening realization that my daughter might see me not as the woman who raised her, who read her bedtime stories and nursed her through fevers, but as a resource to be exploited. A final, untapped asset in her portfolio. The next day, Leo met me for coffee. He looked different from the lanky student I remembered. He was dressed in a simple but expensive-looking gray sweater, his dark hair shorter, his gaze more focused. He carried an understated authority. "Professor Thornell," he began after we'd settled into a quiet corner booth, "I did a preliminary deep dive on Biovanti's innovations last night." "And?" I asked, my hands wrapped around my mug for warmth. He slid a tablet across the table. It showed a series of diagrams and blocks of text. On the surface, it's impressive. They have a professional website, a list of esteemed scientists on their advisory board, and a series of press releases announcing promising results. "That sounds good," I said, a flicker of hope rising within me. Maybe I was wrong, maybe this was real. "It's meant to," Leo said, his expression grim. "But it's all a facade, a digital stage set. I started with the advisory board. Dr. Alastair Finch, their supposed lead researcher, he's real, a respected geneticist. But he retired to the Maldives 3 years ago. I managed to get in touch with his daughter. He has no affiliation with Biovanti's. They're using his name without permission. It's the same story with 2 others on the list. They're ghosts, reputations stolen to lend credibility." My stomach went cold. "What else?" "Their physical address. It's a P.O. box in Delaware. Their corporate filings are a maze of shell companies, each one leading to another, a classic Russian doll setup designed to hide the true ownership. And their promising results? The data is fabricated. I found the original study they plagiarized from a German university. They just changed the numbers." He paused, his gaze meeting mine, full of compassion. "Professor, Biovanti's isn't a company. It's a construct. A high-tech Ponzi scheme designed to pull in as much money as possible before it evaporates." Ponzi scheme. The words landed like stones in the quiet coffee shop, the cheese in the mousetrap. Arthur had been right. "But Amelia," I stammered. "She works for one of the most reputable firms in the city. How could she be involved in something like this? She wouldn't." Leo hesitated, and in that hesitation, I knew the other shoe was about to drop. "Professor, my work isn't just about companies. It's about the flow of data, the movement of money. I had to look into the brokers pushing this fund. I had to look into your daughter." He turned the tablet towards me again. On the screen was a financial chart, a jagged line that plunged downwards like a falling knife. "This is a trading account," he said softly. "It belongs to Amelia. She made a series of high-risk options trades over the last quarter. She bet the wrong way on the market. Big time. She's been trying to hide it, moving funds between accounts, but the digital trail is there if you know how to look for it. She's not just in debt, Professor. She's facing catastrophic losses. We're talking millions, enough to end her career and put her in serious legal jeopardy with her firm and her clients." I stared at the screen, the red line a bloody gash across the page. It all clicked into place. The desperation, the urgency, the feverish look in her eyes. She wasn't trying to make me rich. She was trying to save herself. She needed my life savings, my entire legacy, to plug a hole in her own disastrous financial life. She was willing to feed her mother's future to the wolves to save herself from the consequences of her own greed. A wave of nausea washed over me, so profound it was dizzying. This was worse than a simple deception. This was a betrayal of the most fundamental kind. She had looked me in the eye, spoken of legacy and trust, all while planning to sacrifice me on the altar of her own failure. "What do I do, Leo?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. He reached across the table, his voice firm but gentle. "Right now, you do nothing, you play along. You let her think you're considering it. The people behind this scheme are watching. If they think you're pulling away, they'll simply disappear and move on to the next target. But if you let them think you're on the hook, they'll get careless." He leaned in closer. "And while they're getting careless, you and I are going to talk to someone else. Someone at the Securities and Exchange Commission." Leaving the coffee shop, the familiar streets of Boston felt alien, the crisp autumn air thick with deceit. Every smiling face I passed seemed like a mask. The world I had known, a world of trust and quiet dignity, had been shattered. Amelia was not just my daughter. She was a predator, and I was her chosen prey. but the woman who walked out of that coffee shop was not the same one who had walked in. The gentle, tea-brewing professor was gone. In her place was someone else. A historian who had just been handed a primary source document of the highest betrayal, and I would follow that evidence wherever it led, no matter how dark the place. My name is Vana Thornell. And this is the story of how I took back my name, my legacy, and my future from the person I thought I loved most in the world. Walking home, the familiar red brick sidewalks of Beacon Hill seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Every carved lintel and wrought iron fence, once symbols of history and stability, now felt like part of an elaborate theatrical set. My home, my sanctuary for 4 decades, was no longer a fortress of memory but a target. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped inside, the scent of lemon oil and old paper wrapping around me like a shroud. I walked into the living room and stood before the gallery wall Arthur and I had so lovingly assembled. There was Amelia at age 5, a gap-toothed smile splitting her face as she held up a finger painting of a lopsided sun. There she was at her high school graduation, confident and beaming in her cap and gown. And there she was on her first day at the financial firm, a picture I had taken myself, her eyes blazing with an ambition that seemed, at the time, so pure and thrilling. Where did she go? When did the girl who believed in sunshine and hard work become a woman who would forge a new reality from lies? History is full of such transformations, of course. Republics that slide into empires, saints who become sinners. But the slow, creeping corruption of a nation is an academic tragedy. The corruption of your own child is a blade in the heart. I sank into Arthur's worn leather armchair, the one that still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco, and I allowed myself a moment of pure, unadulterated grief. I wept not for the money, but for the daughter I had lost, perhaps years ago, without even realizing she was gone. The shrill ring of the telephone cut through my sorrow. I knew who it was before I saw the caller ID. I took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped my eyes, and composed myself. The curtain was rising. It was time for my performance to begin. "Hello, dear," I answered, my voice a model of maternal warmth. "Mom, I was hoping you'd be home. Have you had another chance to look at the Biovantes materials?" Amelia's voice was tight, a high-tension wire humming with manufactured cheerfulness. "I have, yes. It's all very technical. A lot to take in for an old art historian," I said, letting a touch of feigned helplessness soften my words. It was a role I despised, the slightly dotty, out-of-touch elderly woman, but I knew it was the role she expected me to play. "I know, Mom, that's why you have me, just trust my expertise. We're running out of time. Charles, that's my managing partner, he had to practically beg the fund manager to hold your spot open. He's doing it as a favor to me." Charles, the name was new, another player on the stage. "Oh, that's very kind of him," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's just..." "Amelia, it's everything your father and I built. It feels like such a monumental step." This part, at least, was true. "It is monumental," she agreed, seizing on the word. "It's the step that takes our family's legacy from comfortable to perpetual. Imagine, Mom, a foundation in Arthur's name, a wing at the museum, the Vana Thornell Scholarship for Art History students. This isn't about just living well. It's about creating something that lasts forever." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She dangled my own dreams in front of me, dreams we had discussed on quiet evenings, and twisted them into a justification for her scheme. She was using my love for her father, for my students, as leverage to betray us all. A cold, hard anger began to replace my grief. It was a clarifying anger, focusing my thoughts like a magnifying glass. "You paint a very compelling picture, dear," I said, my voice steady. "Let me sleep on it one more night. I'll call you in the morning with my decision." "Morning is great. Perfect. Mom, you're making the right choice, you'll see. This is our future." "Yes, darling," I said softly. "It certainly is." I hung up the phone, my hand steady. The time for tears was over. The next day, Leo drove me to a featureless gray building in the Government Center complex. There were no names on the directory, only suite numbers. We rode a silent elevator to the 10th floor and were shown into a small, functional office with a panoramic view of the city I loved. The man who rose to greet us was named David Miller. He had the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much human greed and the crisp, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had dedicated his life to untangling it. He was an enforcement agent with the SEC. He shook my hand first. "Mrs. Thornell, thank you for coming in. It takes courage to do what you're doing." "It takes betrayal, Agent Miller," I corrected him. "Courage is just what's left over." We sat, and for the next hour, Leo walked him through the evidence. He spoke a language I didn't fully understand, of IP spoofing, encrypted data packets, and blockchain forensics. But the story it told was brutally clear. He laid out the digital architecture of the Biovantes fraud, a phantom company built of stolen identities and fabricated data. Then he displayed the evidence of Amelia's financial ruin, her accounts bleeding red ink, her frantic attempts to cover her tracks, leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs that Leo had followed to their inevitable conclusion. Miller listened intently, his expression unreadable. He asked sharp, incisive questions, but mostly he let Leo talk. When Leo was finished, Miller leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "This is one of the cleanest presentations I've ever seen, Mr. Martinez. You've saved my team months of work," he said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. He then turned his gaze to me. "Mrs. Thornell, what we have here is a classic affinity fraud with a heartbreaking twist. They are using your daughter and her reputation to lure in investors. She is both a perpetrator and in some ways a victim of the people holding her leash." "The people holding her leash?" I asked. "Your daughter's losses are not accidental," Miller explained. "The options she was trading are notoriously volatile. The firm she works for, Sterling and Finch, is known for its high-pressure environment. It's likely her superiors encouraged this level of risk. When she lost, they didn't fire her. Why? Because she became more valuable to them. A desperate, compromised broker is a motivated broker. They have her trapped. They present her with a solution, this miracle fund, Biovantes. She sells it to her clients, starting with the one she thinks is the easiest mark, her own mother. The money comes in, plugs the hole in her accounts, and a hefty commission goes to the firm and the creators of the fund. Once they've bled her client list dry, they'll cut her loose and the fund will disappear, long before anyone realizes their money is gone. The calculated cruelty of it all was staggering. They hadn't just allowed Amelia to fail, they had engineered it. They had weaponized her ambition and then aimed her directly at me. "Her boss," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "She mentioned a Charles Sterling." Miller nodded grimly. "We know him well. He's a shark who swims in murky water. We've never been able to pin anything on him directly. He's always insulated, layers of plausible deniability between him and the crime. Your daughter, she's his latest layer." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we use their own trap against them," Miller said, leaning forward. "Mrs. Thornell, this is where it gets difficult. We need you to continue your performance. We need you to agree to the investment." I felt a jolt of fear, raw and primal. "You want me to hand over my life savings to these criminals?" "No," he said firmly. "The money will never be at risk. We will control the transaction from our end. It will be a wire transfer from a federal account, flagged and tracked every step of the way. But you need to sign their paperwork. You need to go through the motions. We need Amelia, and by extension Mr. Sterling, to believe they have succeeded. We need to follow that money. Your transaction will be the piece of cheese that lures the king rat, not just the pawns, out of the shadows. It's the only way to dismantle the entire network." He held my gaze. "It's a lot to ask. You would be placing yourself in the middle of a federal investigation. Your daughter will be arrested." The finality of his words struck me silent. My daughter will be arrested. It was one thing to be angry, to feel betrayed. It was another entirely to be the instrument of her downfall. I looked out the window at the city's skyline, at the thousands of windows behind which thousands of lives were unfolding. How many of them contained a story like mine? "I once taught a seminar on Goya's black paintings," I said, my voice distant. "They were painted on the walls of his house in his old age after he had seen the horrors of war and the corruption of the human soul. They are dark, grotesque, and filled with despair, but they are also brutally honest. He painted what he saw." I turned back to Agent Miller. "My daughter has shown me what she is. I cannot unsee it, and I cannot allow her or the men behind her to do this to anyone else." I took a breath. "I'll do it." A look of profound respect settled on Miller's face. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornell." That night, Margaret came over with a bottle of outrageously expensive French wine and 2 tubs of gourmet ice cream. "This is a crisis kit," she announced, setting the items on my kitchen counter, "for strategic planning and emotional reinforcement." I told her everything. About Leo's findings, Amelia's catastrophic losses, the meeting with the SEC, and the role I had agreed to play. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression hardening with every detail. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, swirling the deep red wine in her glass. "Well," she finally said, her voice tight with fury, "I hope they build a special circle of hell for men like Charles Sterling, and I hope Amelia gets a cell with a view of it." "Maggie, she's still my daughter," I whispered, the conflict tearing at me. Is she? Margaret countered, her eyes flashing. The daughter you raised wouldn't do this. The person who is doing this is a stranger wearing your daughter's face. And you, Vanna, owe that stranger nothing. You owe her accountability. You owe it to Arthur's memory, and you owe it to yourself. She topped off my glass. So, we have a plan. You are the bait. Leo is your tech wizard. Miller is the cavalry. What am I? You, I said, a small smile touching my lips for the first time that day, are the Minister of War. Her answering smile was ferocious. Excellent. My first decree is that we eat this pistachio ice cream directly from the carton while we plot. The next morning, I made the call. Amelia, darling, it's Mom. Mom, good morning. Do you have good news for me? The forced brightness in her voice was almost painful to hear. I've thought about it all night, I said, letting a dramatic pause hang in the air. I read every word of that brochure, and you're right, your father would have wanted me to be bold. He would have wanted us to secure our legacy. I could hear the audible sigh of relief on the other end of the line, a release of tension so profound it was almost a sob. Oh, Mom, thank you. You won't regret this, I promise. I know, dear, I said, and I had never been more certain of a promise's hollowness. Now, you just tell me what papers I need to sign. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Amelia, buoyed by what she believed was her victory, became a doting, attentive daughter. She brought over pastries from my favorite bakery, fresh flowers for the mantelpiece, and chattered endlessly about the glorious future awaiting us. Each act of kindness was a twist of the knife. She would sit in the very chair where I had wept for her and speak of trust and family, her eyes bright and her smile unwavering. It was a performance worthy of the stage, and I found myself responding with one of my own. I played the part of the slightly overwhelmed but ultimately trusting mother, asking naive questions about the process, marveling at her cleverness. It's all going to be done through a wire transfer, Mom, she explained one afternoon, spreading a sheaf of documents across my dining room table. It's the fastest, most secure way to move the funds. You'll just need to sign these liquidation authorizations for your current portfolio and this investment agreement with Biovantes. I looked down at the papers. The print was small, the language dense and impenetrable. It was designed to intimidate, to encourage a blind trust in the person sliding it across the table. I picked up the pen Amelia offered me, its gold nib gleaming under the light. My hand was perfectly steady. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Agent Miller's words echoed in my head, "Go through the motions. We control the transaction." All looks so official, I remarked, stalling for a moment. Of course it is. This is the big leagues, Mom, she said, her voice laced with pride. I could see her boss, Charles Sterling, in her posture, the casual arrogance, the dismissive wave of the hand. She had absorbed his persona. One by one, I signed the documents, my signature, once a mark of identity, now a tool in a federal sting operation. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a piece of the old Vanna Thornell, the trusting mother, fall away. Perfect, Amelia breathed, gathering the papers with a reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. I'll file these with my team immediately. Charles is so thrilled, Mom. He said he's proud to have our family as part of this venture. He wants to meet you, actually. He's hosting a small cocktail party for the initial Biovantes investors on Friday night, a sort of welcome to the club. You have to come. The invitation was unexpected. A meeting, not just with Amelia, but with the shark himself. I felt a flicker of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold resolve. This was an opportunity. Why, that sounds lovely, dear, I said. I'd be delighted to meet the man who is helping to shape our family's future. I called Agent Miller as soon as she left. They want a meeting. A party at Charles Sterling's home. We were hoping for this. Miller's voice was calm and steadying. It's his victory lap. He likes to gloat. It's a weakness we can exploit. We'll have a surveillance team outside, but we can't put a wire on you without a warrant, which we don't have the grounds for yet. You'll be on your own inside. Your job is simple. Listen. Listen for names, for details about other investors, for any hint of their exit strategy. Don't be a hero, Mrs. Thornell. Just be a proud mother enjoying her daughter's success. Don't worry, Agent Miller, I said, looking at my reflection in the dark window. I have been rehearsing for this role my entire life. To prepare, I enlisted my own team. Margaret, my Minister of War, was tasked with my wardrobe. You can't go in there looking like a retired professor, she declared, raiding my closet. You must look like old money, the kind of money that doesn't need to shout. Quiet, elegant, and utterly untouchable. She finally settled on a deep emerald silk dress and a simple string of pearls that had been my mother. Perfect, she said. You look like you own half of Boston and are bored by it. My other ally was Dr. Alastair Finch's daughter, Clara. After Leo had contacted her, she had been horrified to learn of her father's name being used. A fierce, articulate woman in her late 40s, she was an international human rights lawyer and possessed a spine of pure steel. She had flown in from London, determined to help bring down the people who had stolen her family's good name. We met at my house the day before the party. Clara's anger was a palpable force in the room. "These people, they don't just steal money," she said, her British accent clipping the words sharply. "They steal trust, they steal legacies. My father spent 50 years building his reputation with integrity. For them to use it as a cheap marketing tool, it's despicable." "Clara, I'm so sorry you've been dragged into this," I said. "On the contrary, Vanna," she replied, her eyes meeting mine with a shared fire. "I'm grateful you've given me a chance to fight back. So, what's the plan for tomorrow night?" "I'm the fly on the wall," I said. "My job is to listen." "Then you'll need a better way to remember what you hear than just memory," Leo said, stepping forward. He'd been quiet until now, tapping away on his laptop. He held up a small, elegant silver locket on a delicate chain. It was beautifully engraved with an intricate floral pattern. "This is for you." I took it. It was cool and heavy in my palm. "It's beautiful, Leo." "It's more than beautiful," he said with a smile. "It's a high-fidelity audio recorder. State-of-the-art. The microphone is concealed in the clasp. You press the tiny sapphire in the center once to activate it. The battery life is 8 hours, more than enough for a cocktail party." I stared at him, astonished. "You're giving me a wire." "Agent Miller can't," Leo said, his eyes twinkling. "But I'm a private citizen providing a gift to a friend. The evidence will be admissible, just don't get caught." Friday night arrived, cloaked in a cold, drizzling rain. Amelia picked me up in her gleaming black Mercedes, her excitement a stark contrast to the churning in my stomach. As I settled into the plush leather seat, I subtly pressed the tiny sapphire on the locket. A faint vibration against my skin told me it was active. Charles Sterling lived in a glass-and-steel monstrosity of a house in the suburbs, a place that screamed of new money and a profound lack of soul. The rooms were vast and sparsely furnished, with abstract art on the walls that looked chosen by a decorator to match the color of the sofas. The guests were a mix of slick, predatory-looking men in expensive suits and younger women in glittering dresses. They all had the same hungry, restless eyes. "Mom, there he is," Amelia whispered, guiding me toward a tall, silver-haired man holding court by a massive fireplace. Charles Sterling was handsome in a cruel, reptilian way. His smile didn't reach his cold, blue eyes. He turned as we approached, and that smile widened. "Amelia, my star, and this must be the brilliant woman who raised you," he said, taking my hand. His grip was firm, his skin dry and cool. "Vanna Thornell, it is an absolute honor. We are so thrilled to have you with us." "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Amelia has told me so much about the wonderful work you're doing. Please call me Charles." "We're all family here," he said, gesturing around the room. "A family of visionaries. The people in this room, Vanna, we are the ones who see the future and aren't afraid to seize it." He introduced me to a few of the other investors. There was a retired dentist from Connecticut who had apparently invested his entire pension, and a young tech heir who seemed more interested in the champagne than the conversation. They spoke in glowing terms about Biovantes, parroting the same lines from the brochure. They were all sheep, mesmerized by the wolf in their midst. I played my part, nodding and smiling, asking innocuous questions, but my ears were open, straining to catch every snippet of conversation around me. I drifted away from Amelia, feigning a need to admire a particularly garish sculpture, and positioned myself near a small group where Sterling was talking to 2 other men. "The Cayman account is set for the final transfer on Monday the 17th, Sterling was saying, his voice low. "Once Vanna Thornell's funds clear, that will be the final tranche. We trigger the bankruptcy clause in the Delaware shell on Tuesday, and by the time anyone realizes what's happened, we'll be ghosts." "What about the brokers, Amelia and the others?" one of the men asked. Sterling let out a low chuckle. "They're the fire break. They'll take the heat. They signed the paperwork, they made the promises. By the time the regulators untangle it all, we'll be sipping rum on a beach with no extradition treaty." "It's a clean burn, always is." My blood ran cold. A clean burn. They were going to sacrifice my daughter without a second thought, leaving her to face the legal firestorm while they disappeared. My anger towards Amelia was a complex, tangled thing, but in that moment, all I felt was a primal surge of maternal fury. She was a fool. She was a criminal. But she was my fool, and these men were going to destroy her. I needed to get closer to Sterling to keep him talking. I rejoined the group, feigning a sudden thought. Charles, I said, interrupting him smoothly. Forgive me for being a novice in these matters, but I was so impressed by the science behind Biovantes. I was particularly fascinated by the work of Dr. Alastair Finch. Such a brilliant mind. Is there any chance he might be joining us tonight? Sterling's smile didn't falter, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance? Caution? Ah, Dr. Finch, he said, recovering instantly. A true pioneer. Unfortunately, his research is at such a delicate stage that he can't be pulled away. He's completely sequestered in our lab in Geneva. A brilliant man, as you say, his name is what gives us our unimpeachable credibility. The lie was so bald, so effortless, it was almost admirable. He was selling a ghost, and he was doing it with the confidence of a master showman. Just then, the front door opened. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway, rain dripping from her trench coat. She was tall, poised, with an air of absolute authority. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on our group. Sterling's smile finally froze on his face. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered. The woman strode into the room, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Her gaze was locked on Charles Sterling, and it was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Mr. Sterling?" she said, her voice ringing out in the suddenly quiet room. "My name is Clara Finch. I'm Dr. Alastair Finch's daughter. And you and I need to have a word about the man you have sequestered in your imaginary lab in Geneva." A collective gasp went through the room. The chatter died, the clinking of glasses ceased. Every eye was fixed on the confrontation unfolding by the fireplace. I saw Amelia's face go pale, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. She looked from Clara to Charles Sterling, a dawning horror in her eyes. This was not part of the script. Sterling recovered in a heartbeat, his composure a mask of polished steel. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Well, this is a surprise. I'm afraid there must be some mistake. We have no affiliation with anyone by that name. You must be confused." "Oh, I'm not confused, Mr. Sterling. Not in the slightest," Clara said, advancing another step. She was a prosecutor in her own courtroom now, and the entire party was her jury. "I'm holding a cease and desist letter from my father's legal team, demanding you stop using his name, his image, and his reputation to defraud innocent people. I also have a sworn affidavit from him, dated 2 days ago from his home in the Maldives, stating unequivocally that he has never heard of Biovantes innovations." She pulled a document from her coat pocket and held it up. The silence in the room was now absolute, thick with tension and the dawning realization among the other investors that they had been spectacularly duped. The retired dentist looked like he was about to faint. Sterling's face, for the first time, lost its sheen of control. A flush of dark red crept up his neck. "This is preposterous. This is slander. Security," he barked, looking around for support that wasn't there. "It's not slander when it's the truth," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I stepped forward to stand beside Clara. All pretense of the dotty old woman was gone. My voice was the one I used in lecture halls, calm, clear, and commanding. "I am Vanna Thornell, and I too have a few questions about my investment." Amelia looked at me, her mouth agape. "Mom, what are you doing?" she whispered, a note of panic in her voice. I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on Sterling. "You see, Charles, you told me Dr. Finch was sequestered in Geneva. I find that strange because his daughter seems to think he's in the Maldives. One of you, it appears, is misinformed." Sterling's eyes narrowed into slits. He saw the trap now. He didn't know how deep it went, but he knew Clara's arrival was not a coincidence. He looked from her to me, the pieces clicking into place behind his cold eyes. "You," he hissed at me. "You set this up." "Let's just say I believe in due diligence," I replied coolly. The party was dissolving into chaos. Other investors were starting to clamor, demanding answers, their voices rising in a panicked chorus. Sterling's 2 associates were already inching towards a side door, their faces grim. The clean burn was turning into a wildfire, and they were all about to be caught in it. Sterling turned to Amelia, his face a mask of fury. "Get her out of here," he snarled. "Control your mother." But Amelia was frozen, staring at me. The carefully constructed world she had built for herself was shattering around her. The lies she had told herself, that this was a real opportunity, that she was helping her mother, that she was a star broker on the verge of a huge success, were all being exposed as the pathetic self-delusions they were. "Mom, what is going on?" she pleaded, her voice breaking. "The truth, Amelia," I said, my voice softening for a moment with a pang of pity that I quickly suppressed. "It's called the truth, a concept you seem to have forgotten." Suddenly, the front door burst open again. This time, it wasn't a lone woman in a trench coat. It was Agent Miller and a team of 6 stern-faced men and women in dark blue jackets with SEC enforcement emblazoned on the back. "Charles Sterling," Miller's voice boomed across the room. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy." 2 agents moved swiftly to Sterling, cuffing his hands behind his back. He didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a look of cold, calculating rage. His eyes found mine across the chaotic room. It was a look of pure hatred, a promise of retribution. The other agents began fanning out, identifying the other key players. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one agent said to a panicked Amelia. "No, wait," Amelia cried, looking at me, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "Mom, tell them there's been a mistake. I'm your daughter." "Yes, you are," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I felt the cold weight of the locket against my skin, a silent witness to every lie. "And you have made your choices." I watched as they led her away. She didn't look like a high-flying financial supernova anymore. She looked small and lost and desperately young. For a fleeting moment, I saw the 5-year-old with the gap-toothed smile. Then she was gone. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, official voices, and the quiet, methodical work of the federal agents securing what they called the scene of the crime. Clara and I were taken to a quiet room where we gave our statements. Leo arrived shortly after, having coordinated with Miller's team from a surveillance van down the street. "You did it, Professor," he said, his face glowing with a mixture of relief and admiration. "The recording from the locket is crystal clear. Sterling's confession about the Cayman account, the bankruptcy, sacrificing the brokers, it's all there. It's the nail in his coffin." Clara clasped my hand. "My father will be so grateful, Vanna. You've not only protected his name, you've brought down a predator who has likely ruined many other lives." But I felt no elation, no sense of victory. I only felt a profound and weary sadness. I had won, but what had I lost in the process? Margaret was waiting for me when I finally got home in the early hours of the morning. She had a pot of tea brewing and a look of fierce concern on her face. "It's done," I said, sinking into the armchair. I told her everything that had happened at the party, Clara's dramatic entrance, Sterling's arrest, and the final, heartbreaking sight of Amelia being led away. "Oh, Vanna," she said softly, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. "You did the right thing, the only thing you could do." But to see her face, Maggie, it will haunt me. "Of course it will," she said, her voice firm but kind. "You're a mother, but love isn't about enabling destruction, either of yourself or of them. Sometimes, the most loving thing a parent can do is let their child face the consequences of their actions. That's where the real learning begins." We sat in silence for a long time, sipping our tea as the first gray light of dawn began to creep into the sky, washing the city in a clean, new light. The next few weeks were a maelstrom of legal proceedings. My recorded evidence was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case against Charles Sterling and his inner circle. He and his partners were denied bail, deemed extreme flight risks. The Biovantes scheme unraveled completely, revealing a trail of dozens of victims across the country, retirees, small business owners, people who had trusted their brokers, just as I had been expected to trust my daughter. Amelia's situation was more complex. Given her cooperation and the evidence that she had been manipulated and pressured by Sterling, she was offered a deal. She would plead guilty to lesser charges, serve a reduced sentence, and agree to testify against her former boss. Her career in finance was over irrevocably. She would be barred from the industry for life. She would have a criminal record, and she would go to prison. Her lawyer, a weary public defender, called to inform me of the plea deal. "She's asking to see you, Mrs. Thornell." The thought of facing her filled me with a paralyzing dread. What would I say? What was there left to say? "You don't have to go," Margaret told me fiercely when I discussed it with her. "You've done more than enough." "I know," I said, "but I think I need to, for myself, to close this chapter." The visiting room at the detention center was a sterile, soulless place, painted a sickening shade of pale green. It smelled of disinfectant and despair. Amelia was let in, wearing a drab, gray jumpsuit. Her hair was unkempt, the severe bob grown out into an awkward shag. There were dark circles under her eyes. All the gloss and polish had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, fragile-looking young woman I barely recognized. We sat across from each other at a small metal table, a thick pane of plexiglass between us. We stared at each other for a long moment, the silence thick with unspoken accusations and years of history. She spoke first, her voice a hoarse whisper. "They told me." "About the locket, that you recorded everything." I nodded. "I did." "Why?" The word was a single, painful note of anguish. "Why would you do that to me? I'm your daughter." I looked at her, at the genuine confusion and pain in her face, and I realized with a sudden, devastating clarity that she still didn't truly get it. She saw my actions as a betrayal of her, not as a consequence of her betrayal of me. "I did it because you are my daughter, Amelia," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I did it because the woman I saw, the one willing to steal her own mother's future to cover her mistakes, was a stranger to me. I did it because your father didn't work his entire life just so his legacy could be used to bail out your bad decisions. I did it because it was the only way to stop you, and to stop the men who were using you." Tears began to stream down her face, silent and unceasing. "I lost everything," she sobbed. "No, you didn't," I said, and the words surprised even me. "You lost your job, you lost your money, you lost your freedom for a time, but you haven't lost everything. You have a chance when this is over to build a different life. A real one that isn't based on lies and a desperate need to impress people who don't care about you. You have a chance to find out who you really are without the Chanel and the fancy titles." I leaned as close to the plexiglass as I could. "That is the gift I have given you, Amelia. The terrible, painful, necessary gift of a rock bottom. The question is, what will you build on it?" She had no answer. She just wept, her shoulders shaking. And I sat there, watching the daughter I had lost, and wondered if, one day in the ashes of this ruin, I might find her again. Leaving the detention center, I stepped out into the harsh sunlight, feeling as though I had surfaced from some deep, pressurized chasm. The city noise, the traffic, the everyday bustle of life seemed jarringly normal. Inside that pale green room, a world had ended. Out here, the world just kept on turning. I walked for hours, with no destination in mind, letting the rhythm of my steps on the pavement process the encounter. The terrible, painful, necessary gift of a rock bottom. Had that been the right thing to say? Or had it been cruel? I didn't know. All I knew was that it was the truth as I saw it. The trial of Charles Sterling was a media sensation, a lurid tale of high-finance deception that captivated the city. I was called to testify, of course. Walking into that courtroom, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on me. I saw Sterling at the defendant's table, his handsome face a mask of cold indifference. He refused to look at me. On the stand, I simply told my story, guided by the prosecutor's calm questions. I spoke of Amelia's visit, of the glossy brochure, of my suspicions. And then the prosecutor played the audio from the locket. The sound of my own voice, my daughter's voice, and Charles Sterling's voice filled the silent courtroom. His casual, cruel words about the Cayman account, the bankruptcy, the clean burn, and leaving the brokers to take the heat echoed off the polished wood walls. It was devastating. The jury was spellbound. I watched Sterling's face as his own arrogance condemned him. For the first time, a crack appeared in his composure. A flicker of pure, animal panic. Amelia testified the next day. I wasn't in the courtroom, but Margaret went, a silent pillar of support I hadn't even asked for. She called me the moment it was over. "She was magnificent," Margaret said, her voice thick with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. "She didn't make excuses. She didn't cry. She just laid out the facts. How Sterling and the partners fostered a culture of insane risk-taking. How they groomed her, pressured her, and then, when she was vulnerable, handed her the Bio-Vantes scheme as her only salvation. She took responsibility for her own choices, for her greed and her cowardice. But she also painted a chilling picture of the system that created her." "How did she seem?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She seemed free," Margaret said after a pause, "like a person who had finally stopped performing." The jury took less than 5 hours to convict Charles Sterling on all counts. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, a sentence that would likely see him die behind bars. His associates received similar sentences. The king rat had been caught in the trap. Amelia was sentenced a month later. Because of her testimony and her clear remorse, the judge was lenient. She received a sentence of 18 months in a minimum security federal facility. With good behavior, she could be out in a year, a lifetime. The day she was transferred, she was allowed one final phone call. She called me. "Mom," her voice was small but clear. "I'm here, Amelia." I wanted to say you were right," she said, the words coming out in a rush as if she were afraid they would vanish if she hesitated. "About the gift of rock bottom. It's the first time in 10 years I haven't had to lie to anyone. About my trades, about my life, about how terrified I was of failing." There was a long pause. "I'm still terrified, but it's different now." "What are you terrified of?" I asked gently. "Of finding out there's nothing left. When you strip away the job and the money, what if there's no one there?" "There is someone there," I said, my voice catching. "I remember her. She used to bring me dandelions and tell me they were sunshine flowers." A small, choked sob came through the phone. "I remember her too," she whispered. "I think I want to try and find her again." "When you do," I said, tears now streaming down my own face, "tell her that her mother misses her very much." The line went dead. I stood in my quiet house, the receiver still pressed to my ear, and felt the first, tentative flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time: hope. Life settled into a new, strange rhythm. The world no longer saw me as just Vanna Thornell, retired professor. I was now the mother from the Biovantes trial. I received letters from strangers, other victims of fraud, thanking me for my courage. Reporters camped outside my door for a week before finally giving up. I was invited onto talk shows, an invitation I politely but firmly declined. My story was my own, not a piece of public entertainment. The most significant change, however, was what to do with the legacy I had fought so hard to protect. The money, which had been held in escrow by the SEC, was returned to me in full. It sat in a low-interest savings account, a silent testament to the storm that had passed. It felt tainted. To simply reinvest it in more blue-chip stocks felt hollow, meaningless. Arthur's legacy, our legacy, deserved more than that. It deserved a purpose. I found that purpose in an unexpected place. Leo Martinez came to visit me a few months after the trial. He looked tired but energized. "We did a good thing, Professor," he said, accepting a cup of tea. "But Sterling is just one shark in an ocean of them. The kind of fraud he ran is happening every day in 1,000 different forms, and the primary targets are almost always the elderly. People who aren't digital natives, who are more inclined to trust a friendly voice on the phone or a polished email." "What can be done?" I asked. "Education," he said simply. "We need to arm them, teach them to recognize the red flags, show them how to protect their digital and financial lives." "I can handle the tech side, but I don't speak their language." "You do, you're a teacher, the best I ever had." And that was how the Arthur Thornell Legacy Project was born. It started small. I called Margaret, who, with her characteristic enthusiasm, immediately volunteered to develop the humanities portion of our curriculum. "We'll teach critical thinking," she declared. "How to deconstruct a narrative, whether it's in a fraudulent prospectus or a Shakespearean tragedy. It's the same skill set." Clara Finch, hearing about our project, offered her legal expertise, creating easy-to-understand workshops on elder law, power of attorney, and victims' rights. Our trio, the art historian, the literature professor, and the human rights lawyer, became an unlikely team of warriors against fraud. We started by offering free workshops at local community centers and libraries. Leo and his team from his cybersecurity firm built the curriculum: how to spot a phishing email, securing your online banking, the psychology of a scam. I would open each session. I would stand before a room full of people my own age, people with kind, trusting faces, and I would tell them my story. I never spared myself. I told them of my own naivete, my desire to trust my daughter, my near-catastrophic mistake. I laid my vulnerability bare for them to see. And in doing so, I gave them permission to acknowledge their own. The stories that came out in those sessions were heartbreaking. Men and women who had lost their savings to a grandchild with a drug problem, to a smooth-talking contractor, to a cruel romance scam. They had been united by their losses, but also by a profound sense of shame. They felt foolish. "You are not foolish," I would tell them, my voice ringing with a conviction born of my own experience. "You were targeted. You were hunted. Your trust and your good nature were weaponized against you. There is no shame in being a victim. The only shame is in allowing the predators to win, to silence us, to make us afraid. We are not afraid." The project grew faster than we could have ever imagined. We used a portion of Arthur's legacy to turn it into a full-fledged foundation. We developed an online portal with resources. We trained other seniors to become peer educators, creating a network of informed, empowered individuals. We weren't just teaching them about passwords, we were building a community of resistance. We were taking back our power. I wrote to Amelia every week. I didn't write about the trial or the foundation. I wrote about the small things, about the stubborn rose bush in the garden that had finally bloomed, about a fascinating documentary I had watched on the Impressionists, about how Margaret had tried to bake bread and nearly set her kitchen on fire. I told her about my life, the quiet, contented life she had once scorned, showing her that its value wasn't measured in dollars but in moments. For months she didn't write back. And then one rainy Tuesday, a thin envelope with her name and return address appeared in my mailbox. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter inside was short, written in a cramped, unfamiliar hand. "Mom," it began, "thank you for the letters. I read them all. I've been working in the prison library. It's quiet. It reminds me of your study. I've been reading a lot. History, poetry. I read that book of Goya's paintings you told me about once. I think I finally understand what you meant. He painted what he saw. I'm seeing things differently now, too. My release date is in 4 months. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't expect you to be there. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about sunshine flowers. Yours, Amelia. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. The path ahead was uncertain. The wounds were deep, and some scars, I knew, would never fully fade. But for the first time since that awful afternoon when she had walked in with her glossy brochure, I felt the unmistakable possibility of a new chapter. Not a return to the past, but something different, something stronger, something forged in the terrible, painful, necessary fire of truth. The 4 months leading up to Amelia's release passed in a strange, suspended state of anticipation and dread. Her letter sat on my desk, a fragile bridge between the past and a future I could not yet imagine. I read it over and over, dissecting each word like a historian examining a primary text. He painted what he saw. In that single sentence, she acknowledged the truth. She was no longer blaming the artist for the ugliness of the canvas. It was a start. During that time, the foundation consumed me. It was my shield and my sanctuary. The work was demanding, but it was honest work, rooted in genuine need. We expanded our workshops to 3 new community centers. Leo's team developed a simple, user-friendly app that could help seniors identify scam calls and texts in real time. It was a wild success. We were building something real, something that honored Arthur's memory in a way no stock portfolio ever could. One of our most dedicated attendees was a man named George Kowalski, a 78-year-old retired carpenter with hands like gnarled oak and eyes that had seen too much. He came to my office one afternoon, twisting his worn tweed cap in his hands. "Mrs. Thornell," he began, his voice thick with a Chicago accent that had never quite faded. "I gotta thank you. What you're doing here, it's important." "I'm glad you find it helpful, George," I said, offering him a seat. "Helpful." "Lady, you saved my house," he said bluntly. "My own grandson, my Jimmy. Good kid, I thought. He was helping me with my online banking, said he was setting up automatic payments for my bills. Turns out he was setting up automatic payments to his own account. Drained my savings. He was a week away from getting me to sign a reverse mortgage when I came to your first workshop. I saw the red flags you talked about. It was like you were telling my own story." "What did you do?" I asked gently. "I did what was hard," he said, his jaw tightening. "I went to the police. I changed my locks. I cut him off. He's my blood, you know. But sometimes you gotta amputate to stop the poison from spreading. You taught me that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival." He looked at me, his gaze direct and full of a shared, painful understanding. "So, thank you." His words settled deep within me. Sometimes you gotta amputate to stop the poison from spreading. It was a brutal but accurate metaphor for what I had done. George's story, and dozens like it, became the fuel that kept me going. We were a community of survivors, drawing strength from one another, turning our wounds into wisdom. The week before Amelia's release, I convened my council of war. Margaret, Leo, and Clara gathered in my living room. I had made a decision, and I needed to say it out loud to them to test its weight. "She's getting out on Friday," I announced, my voice calmer than I felt. "I'm going to go get her." Margaret set down her teacup, her expression a mixture of concern and fierce protectiveness. "Vana, are you sure? You don't owe her a welcome party. She can take a bus." "I know," I said. "This isn't about what I owe her. It's about what I owe myself. I started this, Maggie. I set these events in motion. I need to be there to see the consequences through to the end, whatever that may be." "What are your terms?" Clara asked, always the lawyer, focusing on the practicalities. "What are the boundaries? She can't just move back in here." "Absolutely not," I agreed. "This house is filled with too many ghosts, too much history. I used some of the foundation's discretionary funds to rent a small, furnished studio apartment for her downtown. It's paid up for 3 months. I've also arranged a job interview for her, at the university library, stacking books. It's quiet, it's humbling, and it's a start." Leo nodded, a look of approval on his face. "A hand up, not a handout. It's a good plan, Professor. It gives her structure and independence without creating dependence." "But what if it's all a front?" Margaret pressed, her loyalty to me making her suspicious. "What if she's just telling you what you want to hear so she can get back in your life and try again in a few years? A leopard doesn't change its spots overnight." "You're right, it doesn't," I said. "And I'm not the same woman I was a year ago, either. My spots have changed, too. I'm not looking for the daughter she was. That person is gone. I'm willing to get to know the person she is now. If she's genuine, we might be able to build something new. If she's not, well, my eyes are wide open this time. The locks on my financial accounts are much, much stronger, and I have all of you. I looked around the room at these three people who had become my family, my defenders. Margaret, my fierce heart. Leo, my brilliant shield. Clara, my righteous sword. Whatever happened with Amelia, I knew I would not be facing it alone. On Friday morning, I drove to the Federal Correctional Facility, a low, grim complex 2 hours west of the city. The sky was a vast, indifferent blue. I waited in the visitor parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel. What if, when I saw her, all I felt was the cold, dead ash of my anger? What if all the hope I had tentatively nurtured was just wishful thinking? And then a door opened and she walked out. She was wearing ill-fitting civilian clothes, a simple pair of jeans and a gray sweatshirt. She carried a single cardboard box containing her belongings. Her hair had been cut short, simply and without style. She looked thin and pale and utterly anonymous. The supernova had collapsed into a white dwarf, small and dense and stripped of all its former fire. She stood blinking in the bright sunlight, looking lost, until she saw my car. For a long moment, she didn't move. I saw the hesitation, the uncertainty. I got out of the car and stood by the open passenger door, waiting. It had to be her choice to cross that distance. Slowly, tentatively, she walked towards me. As she got closer, I could see the changes in her face. The lines of arrogance and impatience around her mouth were gone, replaced by something softer, more hesitant. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now guarded, but clear. She stopped a few feet away from me, clutching the cardboard box to her chest like a shield. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "Hello, Amelia," I said. The silence between us was vast, containing everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the arrests, the trial. It all hung there in the empty space of the parking lot. She was the one who broke it. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and when she spoke, her voice was stripped of all artifice. "I'm sorry," she said, just that. No excuses, no justifications. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I felt she was telling the absolute, unvarnished truth. "I am so sorry, Mom, for everything." I nodded slowly, a lump forming in my throat. "I know you are, Amelia." I gestured to the car. "Get in, let's go." We didn't go home. I drove us to a small, quiet park by the river, a place where we had gone for picnics when she was a little girl. We sat on a wooden bench, watching the sunlight glitter on the water, the cardboard box resting between us like a barrier. "I'm not taking you back to the house," I said, deciding it was best to lay out the new reality immediately. "I've arranged a place for you to stay. It's small, but it's clean and it's yours. There's a job interview for you on Monday. The rest is up to you." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the river. "I don't expect anything, Mom. I don't deserve anything." "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about what comes next. The past is the past, Amelia. We can't change it, we can't erase it, but it isn't gone, it's part of our story now. The question is what we write in the next chapter." She finally turned to look at me, and I could see the fear she had written about in her letter. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be now." "You start by being honest," I said, "with yourself and with me. You start by doing small things well, stacking books, paying your rent, showing up on time. You build a life the way your grandfather built his business, brick by honest brick. There are no shortcuts." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. I opened it and tipped the contents into my palm. It was a single, pressed dandelion preserved in laminate. I had kept it in my wallet for almost 30 years. A sunshine flower. I held it out to her. "And you start by remembering that this person," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "is still in there somewhere. She's the one I'm willing to get to know again." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the small, faded flower. Gently, she reached out and took it from my palm, her fingers brushing against mine. It was the first time we had touched in over a year. It felt like closing a circuit, a small, fragile spark of connection in the vast darkness of what we had been through. I drove her to the apartment building, a simple, clean brick walk-up. I handed her the keys. I didn't go in with her. This was a threshold she had to cross on her own. "Call me after your interview on Monday," I said. "I will," she promised. I watched as she walked into the building, carrying her small box of belongings. She looked up once and gave a small, hesitant wave. I waved back. As I drove away, I didn't feel the triumphant joy of a victor or the magnanimous grace of a forgiving saint. I felt the quiet, weary satisfaction of a builder who has just laid the first, difficult stone of a foundation on treacherous ground. The bridge between us had been destroyed. Now, we had to see if we could build a new one, not of blind trust, but of hard-won, honest forgiveness. And it would be built one small, terrifying, and hopeful stone at a time. The months that followed were an exercise in careful, deliberate reconstruction. Amelia got the job at the library. It was a world away from the high-stakes pressure of her former life. The silence of the stacks, the methodical work of sorting and shelving, the quiet rustle of turning pages, it seemed to have a calming effect on her. We began a new routine. Every Sunday, we would meet for coffee at a neutral cafe halfway between her apartment and my house. Our conversations were stilted at first, navigating a minefield of unspoken history. We didn't talk about the trial, or the money, or Charles Sterling. We talked about books. We talked about the changing leaves in the public garden. We talked about the terrible coffee in the library break room. We were like two strangers learning a new language, starting with the simplest of words. One Sunday, about 3 months in, she told me she had started volunteering at a local soup kitchen on Saturdays. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. She shrugged, stirring her latte. "I don't know, I guess. After spending so long taking things from people, it feels right to give something back, even if it's just a bowl of soup. Most of the people who come in, they've hit rock bottom too. We don't talk about it, but we know. There's a kind of understanding." It was a small thing, but it was a brick, an honest brick. She never asked me for money, not once. I saw her wearing the same simple coat all winter. She learned to budget, to cook for herself, to find satisfaction in a life stripped of all its former luxuries. Slowly, painfully, I began to see glimpses of the woman I had hoped she would become. A woman of substance, not of style. A woman defined by her actions, not her assets. The Arthur Thornell Legacy Project, meanwhile, had become a force in the city. We had helped hundreds of seniors, recovered thousands of dollars in stolen funds, and most importantly, we had shattered the shame that kept so many victims silent. George Kowalski became one of our most passionate peer educators, his gruff, no-nonsense advice resonating deeply with other men who were too proud to admit they'd been fooled. I realized that my experience with Amelia hadn't just been a personal tragedy. It had been a crucible. It had forged me into a different person, a warrior I never knew I had inside me. It had given me a purpose beyond the quiet curation of my own memories. My life was no longer just about preserving the past. It was about actively shaping the future for people who had been rendered invisible and voiceless. 1 year after her release, Amelia invited me to her apartment for dinner. It was the first time I would see her new home. The studio was tiny, but it was immaculate. Books borrowed from her library were stacked neatly on a small shelf. On the wall, she had framed a simple charcoal sketch of the Boston skyline. It was surprisingly good. "I've been taking a class," she said, noticing my gaze. "At the community center, it helps." She had made pasta. It was a simple meal, but she had made it with care. As we sat at her small table, she finally breached the one subject we had never touched. "I've been going to therapy, Mom," she said quietly. "My parole requires it, but I would have gone anyway. We've been talking a lot about why I did what I did." I waited, my fork suspended over my plate. "It wasn't just the money," she continued, her voice low and earnest. I was so afraid of disappointing you, of not living up to Dad's memory. You were both so brilliant, so respected. I felt like I had to achieve something huge, something spectacular to even be in the same league, so I took shortcuts. I took risks. And when it all blew up, I was too ashamed to tell you the truth. It seemed easier to lie, to create this crazy scheme, than to just admit that I had failed." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It wasn't about legacy. It was about fear." In that moment, all the remaining anger in my heart finally dissolved. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. It was the missing piece of the historical record, the one that allowed me to see the full, tragic picture. She wasn't a monster. She was just a person, my person, who had gotten lost in the most profound way. "Your father and I said, my voice thick with emotion, "we never wanted you to be spectacular, Amelia. We just wanted you to be happy, and to be kind." "I know that now," she whispered. "I think I'm finally starting to learn how." That dinner was the laying of the final stone in our new foundation. The bridge was not the same as the one that had been destroyed. It was narrower, more carefully constructed, and built to withstand the truth. But it was real, and it was strong. A few years later, I stood on the stage of the university's main auditorium. It was the 5th anniversary of the Arthur Thornell Legacy Project. The hall was packed. In the front row sat Margaret, Leo, Clara, and George. And beside them, in a simple blue dress, sat Amelia. She had eventually left the library to work for a nonprofit that helped recently incarcerated individuals reintegrate into society. She was using her terrible, painful gift to help others build new lives from their own rock bottoms. She was happy. She was kind. I looked out at the sea of faces, the students, the community members, the survivors, and I thought about the journey that had brought me to this stage. It had started with a lie, with a glossy brochure and a daughter's desperate deception. It had led me through fear, betrayal, and the cold, sterile halls of justice. But it had brought me here, to a place of purpose, to a place of community, to a place of healing. History teaches us that legacies are not simply inherited, I said, my voice ringing out across the hall. They are forged. They are built brick by honest brick, not with money but with choices. We are all the curators of our own lives. We choose what to preserve, what to discard, and what to build anew from the ruins. My eyes found Amelia's in the crowd. She was smiling, a genuine, quiet smile of understanding. We cannot choose the storms that come for us, I concluded. They will come for us all in one form or another. They will threaten to tear down everything we have built, but we can choose what we do in the aftermath. We can choose to be victims of our history, or we can choose to become the authors of our future. We can take the broken pieces, and with courage, with wisdom, and with the help of those who love us, we can build something that is not only strong but beautiful. As the applause washed over me, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was our true legacy. Not the money in the bank, but the strength we had found in the breaking, the purpose we had discovered in the pain, and the hope we had rebuilt together from the ashes of a terrible truth. We had painted what we saw. And in the end, the picture was one of grace. 5 years can feel like a lifetime or the blink of an eye. For me, it had been both. At 80, I moved a little slower, and the lines on my face told a more complex story. But my spirit, I was pleased to find, was more resilient than ever. I was no longer the woman who had simply survived the storm. I had learned to dance in the rain, to find strength in the very fabric of my scars. I stood in the newly dedicated Arthur Thornell Wing for Community Art Education at the museum. The room was bright and airy, filled not with priceless artifacts behind glass, but with workstations, easels, and the cheerful chaos of creation. It was the culmination of the Foundation's work, a permanent home for our mission, funded entirely by the legacy my husband and I had built, now repurposed to serve, protect, and inspire. This space was not a memorial to a man who was gone. It was a living testament to the belief that art and education belong to everyone, not just the privileged few. George Kowalski, now a spry 83, was in a corner, showing a group of teenagers how to carve small, intricate birds from blocks of wood. His hands, once gnarled with the memory of labor, now moved with the gentle precision of an artist sharing his gift. He had found a new purpose, not in building houses, but in building up the confidence of a new generation. Margaret, her silver hair a wild halo, was leading a spirited debate with a group of seniors about whether graffiti could be considered modern art. She was, as always, gloriously and unapologetically herself. She was the intellectual heart of our operation, always reminding us that a critical mind is the best defense against deception. Leo's company had become a national leader in cybersecurity, but he still personally oversaw the Foundation's digital security, calling it his most important account. His loyalty was not just to me, his old professor, but to the mission itself. He had seen how technology could be weaponized and had dedicated a part of his life to ensuring it could also be a shield. Clara Finch had successfully lobbied for stronger federal laws protecting seniors from financial exploitation, a bill colloquially known as the Thornell Act. My Council of War had not disbanded, it had simply expanded its battlefield for the better. They had transformed our personal pain into systemic change. A gentle hand touched my arm. I turned to see Amelia. She was 39 now, her face softer, calmer. The sharp edges of her ambition had been worn smooth, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. She was the executive director of a successful nonprofit that had become a model for prisoner rehabilitation programs across the state. "It's beautiful, Mom," she said, her gaze sweeping across the vibrant room. "Dad would have loved this. All these people, learning, creating, this is a real legacy." "It's our legacy, Amelia," I corrected her gently. "You're a part of this, too. Your work gives people the second chance they need to build their own lives." She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. "It took me a long time to understand what you meant by building with honest bricks, but I get it now. It's slower, it's harder, but the foundation is solid. It doesn't wash away in the first storm." Our relationship was a quiet, steady thing now. We didn't try to recapture the past. We had built something new. It was a bond forged not in the easy sunlight of a happy childhood, but in the difficult, clarifying fire of crisis and forgiveness. It was, for that reason, unbreakable. We had learned to trust each other again, not blindly, but with a deep understanding of human fragility and resilience. A young girl, no older than 10, came up to me, holding up a small watercolor painting of a sunflower. It was bright and messy, and full of a wonderful, untamed energy. "I made this for you, Mrs. Thornell," she said shyly. "To say thank you. My grandma said you helped her so she didn't lose her house." I took the painting, my heart swelling. I looked from the vibrant, imperfect flower to my daughter's face, and then around the room at the community we had built. The money, the betrayal, the fear, it had all been a storm. A terrible, destructive storm. But storms pass. And after they do, if you are very lucky and very brave, you find that the rain has washed the world clean, and in the rich, damp earth, something new and beautiful has begun to grow. That evening, as the dedication ceremony concluded, I was invited to say a few words. I walked to the podium, not with prepared notes, but with only the truth in my heart. "History teaches us that legacies are not simply inherited," I said, my voice ringing out across the hall. "They are forged. They are built brick by honest brick, not with money, but with choices. We are all the curators of our own lives. We choose what to preserve, what to discard, and what to build anew from the ruins." My eyes found Amelia's in the crowd. She was smiling, a genuine, quiet smile of understanding. It wasn't the smile of a stockbroker who had just closed a big deal, but the smile of a woman who had found her worth in service, not in accumulation. "We cannot choose the storms that come for us," I concluded. "They will come for us all in one form or another. They will threaten to tear down everything we have built. But we can choose what we do in the aftermath. We can choose to be victims of our history, or we can choose to become the authors of our future. We can take the broken pieces, and with courage, with wisdom, and with the help of those who love us, we can build something that is not only strong, but beautiful." As the applause washed over me, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was our true legacy. Not the money in the bank, but the strength we had found in the breaking, the purpose we had discovered in the pain, and the hope we had rebuilt together from the ashes of a terrible truth. We had painted what we saw, and in the end, the picture was one of grace. This was my garden, and it was, finally, in full bloom. 5 years can feel like a lifetime or the blink of an eye. For me, it had been both. At 80, I moved a little slower, and the lines on my face told a more complex story, a map of sorrows weathered and joys earned. But my spirit, I was pleased to find, was more resilient than ever. I was no longer the woman who had simply survived the storm. I had learned to dance in the rain, to find strength in the very fabric of my scars, transforming them from marks of trauma into emblems of resilience. I stood in the newly dedicated Arthur Thornell Wing for Community Art Education at the museum, a space that just a few years ago had existed only in my most audacious dreams. The room was bright and airy, with high, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the museum garden, flooding the space with natural light. It was filled not with priceless artifacts behind glass, but with workstations, easels, pottery wheels, and the cheerful chaos of creation. The faint sense of oil paint, damp clay, and freshly brewed coffee mingled in the air. It was the culmination of the Foundation's work, a permanent home for our mission, funded entirely by the legacy my husband and I had built, now repurposed to serve, protect, and inspire. This space was not a memorial to a man who was gone. It was a living testament to the belief that art and education belong to everyone, not just the privileged few. George Kowalski, now a spry 83 with a twinkle in his eye, was in a corner, showing a group of teenagers how to carve small, intricate birds from blocks of pine. His hands, once gnarled with the memory of labor and trembling with rage as he told me his story, now moved with the gentle precision of an artist sharing his gift. He had found a new purpose, not in building houses, but in building up the confidence of a new generation. He told them that patience was the most important tool, a lesson that applied to both wood and life. Margaret, her silver hair a wild halo and her silk scarf a slash of vibrant color, was leading a spirited debate with a group of seniors about whether graffiti could be considered modern art. "Of course it is," she declared, gesturing dramatically. "It is the voice of the disenfranchised, written on the very architecture of power. It is political, it is immediate, and it is brutally beautiful." She was, as always, gloriously and unapologetically herself. She was the intellectual heart of our operation, always reminding us that a critical mind is the best defense against deception. Leo's company had become a national leader in cybersecurity, with government contracts and offices in 3 cities. But he still personally oversaw the foundation's digital security, calling it his most important account. He and Clara had developed an outreach program, sending young tech experts into community centers to give seniors hands-on tutorials, patiently closing the digital divide. His loyalty was not just to me, his old professor, but to the mission itself. He had seen how technology could be weaponized and had dedicated a part of his life to ensuring it could also be a shield. Clara Finch had successfully lobbied for stronger federal laws protecting seniors from financial exploitation, a bill colloquially known as the Thornell Act. My Council of War had not disbanded, it had simply expanded its battlefield for the better. They had transformed our personal pain into systemic change. A gentle hand touched my arm. I turned to see Amelia. She was 39 now, her face softer, calmer. The sharp edges of her ambition had been worn smooth, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. She no longer wore the Chanel suits designed to impress or intimidate. Instead, she wore a simple dress and looked completely at ease in her own skin. She was the executive director of a successful nonprofit that had become a model for prisoner rehabilitation programs across the state. "It's beautiful, Mom," she said, her gaze sweeping across the vibrant room. "Dad would have loved this. All these people. Learning, creating, this is a real legacy." "It's our legacy, Amelia," I corrected her gently. "You're a part of this too. Your work gives people the second chance they need to build their own lives. You're doing the same work, just in a different garden." She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. "It took me a long time to understand what you meant by building with honest bricks, but I get it now. It's slower, it's harder, but the foundation is solid. It doesn't wash away in the first storm." As we were speaking, a nervous-looking young woman approached. She couldn't have been more than 25, and she was anxiously twisting the strap of her purse. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thornell," she asked, her voice small. "I'm Sarah, Martha Jennings's granddaughter. My grandmother took one of your workshops." "Of course, Martha," I said, smiling. "A lovely woman. How is she?" "She's okay," Sarah said, but her eyes told a different story. "It's just. She has a new friend recently. A man she met online. He says he's an oil rig engineer working overseas. He's very charming, and now he's in some temporary financial trouble and she wants to send him money. I've tried to talk to her, but she won't listen. She says I don't understand." A familiar chill went down my spine. It was the old story, with only the names and details changed. I opened my mouth to offer my practiced advice, but Amelia gently stepped forward. "Hi, Sarah, I'm Amelia," she said, her voice warm and empathetic. "That sounds incredibly difficult. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love put themselves in harm's way." Sarah looked at her, her eyes wide with the relief of being understood. "It is. I feel like I'm going crazy. My mother was once in a situation where she felt isolated and was being taken advantage of by someone she trusted," Amelia continued, giving me a meaningful glance. "And the worst part wasn't the money. It was the betrayal. The best thing you can do for your grandmother isn't to argue with her, it's to ask questions. Say, 'I'd love to meet him on a video call. When can we talk?' Or, 'Can I help you look over the wire transfer documents just to make sure everything is legal?' Don't attack her story. Try to step into it with her, carrying a flashlight. Scammers hate the light." I stood there, listening to my daughter speak, and my heart filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was pride, but it was more than that. It was recognition. She had taken the worst experience of her life and alchemized it into wisdom. She had turned her own poison into an antidote for others. She had become a protector. After Sarah left, relieved and armed with a new strategy, Amelia turned to me. "Was that okay?" "My dear," I said, placing my hand on her cheek. "It was perfect." Our relationship was a quiet, steady thing now. We didn't try to recapture the past. We had built something new. It was a bond forged not in the easy sunlight of a happy childhood, but in the difficult, clarifying fire of crisis and forgiveness. It was, for that reason, unbreakable. We had learned to trust each other again, not blindly, but with a deep understanding of human fragility and resilience. A young girl, no older than 10, with pigtails and a smudge of blue paint on her cheek, came up to me, holding up a small watercolor painting of a sunflower. It was bright and messy and full of a wonderful, untamed energy. "I made this for you, Mrs. Thornell," she said shyly. "To say thank you. My grandma said you helped her so she didn't lose her house. Now she's teaching me how to paint." I took the painting, a lump forming in my throat. I looked from the vibrant, imperfect flower to my daughter's face, and then around the room at the community we had built. The money, the betrayal, the fear, it had all been a storm. A terrible, destructive storm that had nearly drowned us all. But storms pass. And after they do, if you are very lucky and very brave, you find that the rain has washed the world clean, and in the rich, damp earth, something new and beautiful has begun to grow. This was my garden, and it was, finally, in full bloom. The applause was a warm, rolling tide, but the true reward was in the quiet moments that followed. As the crowd began to disperse, a woman with kind, tired eyes and a fiercely determined chin approached me. She looked to be in her late 60s, her hands clutching a worn leather purse. "Mrs. Thornell, I'm Alina Vance," she said, her voice steady despite a slight tremor. I just wanted to thank you, not for the speeches or the new building, though they're wonderful. I wanted to thank you for the Thornell Act." "I'm so glad it's been helpful," I said, genuinely moved. It was one thing to hear Clara talk about the law in the abstract. It was another to meet someone whose life it had directly touched. "Helpful doesn't begin to cover it," she said, her gaze unwavering. "My son, he's a good man, but he has a sickness. Gambling. For years, he'd come to me with stories, emergencies. I gave him everything. My savings, my pension cash out. Last year, he tried to get me to sign papers for a home equity loan. He said it was to consolidate my debts to make my life easier." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "The old me would have signed without reading, but I had been to one of your workshops, I heard your story, and for the first time I said no. I told him I needed to take the papers to a lawyer. He fought me on it, got angry, but I held firm." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "The lawyer I found, a young woman from legal aid, she knew all about the new act. She showed me the clauses about undue influence and the mandatory counseling for any senior signing over property to a family member. When my son realized he couldn't just rush me through it, that other people would be looking, he backed down. The act, it was the shield I couldn't be for myself. You gave me the courage and the law gave me the backup. I still have my home. My son is finally in a treatment program. You didn't just save my house, Mrs. Thornell. You gave my family a chance to heal." We stood in silence for a moment, two women who understood the profound pain of a child's destructive choices. I reached out and took her hand. "You did the hard work, Alina. You were the one who said no. That's the victory." This was the real work of the foundation, I realized. Not in the grand openings or the newspaper articles, but in these quiet, fierce moments of empowerment. It was in George, who now ran a weekly Fix It and Talk club for retired men in the Wings workshop. They'd repair old furniture and small appliances, and in the comfortable camaraderie of shared work, they'd talk. They'd talk about their loneliness, their fears of becoming irrelevant, and the grandsons who asked for a little too much money a little too often. George had created a space where pride could be set aside and vulnerability could be shared without judgment. It was in Margaret, who had launched a literary detectives book club, focusing on stories of intrigue and deception. They read Agatha Christie and John le Carré, and through the lens of fiction, they learned to analyze motives, spot inconsistencies, and trust their intuition. "If you can spot the villain in a mystery novel," she'd proclaim, "you're halfway to spotting one in an email." Later that week, I met Amelia for our now sacred Sunday coffee. The ritual had become an anchor for us both. The neutral ground of the cafe had been a safe harbor in the early days. Now, it was simply a place of comfort. Alina Vance came up to me at the opening, I told her, recounting the story. Amelia listened intently, a thoughtful expression on her face. "It's amazing, isn't it?" she said softly. "How one person's story can become a shield for someone else." She took a sip of her coffee. "I had a new client this week at the center, a young man just out of prison for a low-level drug offense. He was terrified. He said he felt like he had failure tattooed on his forehead. He didn't know how to even begin." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him my story," she said, her gaze meeting mine without a trace of shame. "I told him about walking out of that facility with nothing but a cardboard box and a future that felt like a black hole. I told him about the library job, about how for the first month, the silence felt like an accusation. I told him about the humiliation of learning to live on a budget that was less than my old monthly car payment. And I told him about the first time I felt a flicker of pride, which wasn't when I got a promotion, but when I managed to fix my own leaky faucet by watching a video online." She leaned forward, her voice filled with a passion I hadn't heard since her days of pitching stocks, but this time it was pure and resonant. "I told him you don't erase the past. You build on top of it. You use the stones from your own collapsed prison to build a new foundation." He just stared at me for a minute and then he said, "Okay, where's the first brick?" She smiled, a real deep smile that transformed her face. "That's what your rock-bottom gift gave me, Mom. It gave me a new set of building materials." We sat in comfortable silence, the unspoken history between us no longer a minefield, but a shared landscape we had both learned to navigate. The ghosts were still there, but they no longer had power. They were just memories, integrated into the larger tapestry of our lives. The following Sunday, I decided it was time. "I'm making your father's pot roast next weekend," I said, my tone deliberately casual. "I was thinking of inviting Margaret and Leo. Clara is in town. I'd like you to be there." Amelia's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time I had invited her back to the brownstone for a family meal. The house, for so long, had been a sanctuary I needed to protect, even from her. To invite her back was a final act of trust, a declaration that the house was no longer a target, but a home once more. "I'd love that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The next Sunday, my house was filled with a warmth and laughter it hadn't known in years. It was a motley, cobbled-together family, bound not by blood, but by shared crisis and enduring loyalty. Margaret arrived with a bottle of wine and a scandalous story about a plagiarism dispute in the university's English department. Leo brought a new, ridiculously user-friendly tablet he had designed for seniors, which he insisted on demonstrating for George. Clara, fresh from a win in court, was vibrant and energized. George presented me with a small, exquisitely carved wooden wren, its head cocked as if listening to our conversation. And then there was Amelia. She came into the kitchen as I was checking the roast, picking up a knife and starting to chop vegetables for the salad with a quiet, easy competence. We worked side by side, the familiar rhythm of a shared task erasing the last vestiges of awkwardness between us. "Do you ever hear anything about him?" she asked quietly, her back to me as she sliced a cucumber. "Sterling?" The question hung in the air, a ghost at the feast. "Clara mentioned his final appeal was denied last month," I replied, my voice even. "He'll serve his full sentence. They say he spends his days in the prison library trying to find legal loopholes. Some people never learn." "No," she said, turning to face me. "They don't." And in her eyes I saw not pity for him but a profound gratitude for her own different fate. She had lost her freedom for a time, but he had lost his soul. At dinner, the conversation flowed. We talked about politics, art, George's new granddaughter, and Leo's upcoming wedding. Amelia spoke about her work, her passion and expertise evident in every word. She was no longer performing, she was simply being. And the person she was extraordinary. After everyone had left and the house had settled back into its quiet rhythm, I stood in the living room, looking at the portrait of Arthur above the fireplace. The locket Leo had given me, the silent witness to our darkest chapter, now sat in my jewelry box. I no longer needed it. I thought about the word legacy. For so long, I had believed it was something to be protected, a finite treasure to be guarded against the world. I was wrong. A true legacy isn't a vault, it's a garden. It must be tended, nurtured, and sometimes, it must be brutally pruned back to allow for new growth. It must be shared to have any value at all. Arthur's legacy wasn't the sum total of his portfolio. It was in the laughter that still echoed in this room. It was in the community we had built, in the lives we had touched, in the systemic change we had fought for. And it was here, standing right beside me. Amelia had come back into the room, a dish towel in her hand. "Just finishing up," she said. She looked at the portrait, then at me. "He would have been so proud of you, Mom." "He would have been proud of us," I corrected her, reaching out to take her hand. Her grip was strong and sure. In that quiet moment, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost a physical presence. The storm had passed. The house was safe. The foundations were solid. And my daughter, my brave, broken, and beautifully rebuilt daughter, was home.